Chapter 801. Tears began to well up in Xu Xiaowen's eyes before flowing uncontrollably down her cheeks. I always denounce you for being too proud, for being high and mighty, but I'm just as arrogant. You're right, I feel very inferior next to you. We come from such vastly different backgrounds, and you're so exceptional that it's easy for you to attract other women. I was afraid that you'd slowly love me less and less. On that day, when you made that confession to me during the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention, I felt like I was being spoken to like an accessory, and I hated that feeling. You ignored me for half a year, but did you know that I regretted what I did as soon as I left the matchmaking convention? I didn't regret rejecting you, but I shouldn't have embarrassed you in front of all of those people. However, I regret everything now, even my rejection. I shouldn't have rejected you because of my insecurities. I'm sorry, Sang Yu. I was too petty, and I'm sorry for hurting you. So can you please wake up? I'll never be so willful and self-centered ever again. Xu Xiaowen sobbed as she gently stroked Yue's Sang Yu's forehead. That won't do. I like it when you're willful and self-centered. I like you just the way you are. A gentle voice sounded, and Yue's Sang Yu slowly opened his eyes. Xu Xiaowen was given a fright and immediately tried to withdraw her hand, but Yue's Sang Yu grabbed onto her wrist. Don't go, don't leave me. I've had enough of being separated from you during the past 6 months. A faint blush appeared on Xu Xiaowen's face as she asked, when did you wake up? Yue's Sang Yu smiled in response. Right when you began talking. You. Xu Xiaowen's blush deepened even further, and she really wanted to run away, but Yue's Sang Yu refused to let her go. Can you listen to me repent now? Yue's Sang Yu asked in a gentle voice. Xu Xiaowen faltered slightly before raising her head to look at him. Yue's Sang Yu looked straight into her eyes and said, I'm sorry, Xiaowen, it's all my fault. You're right, I'm too arrogant and conceited. I've been this way ever since I was a child, and in all honesty, this is a problem among all of my family members. My pride blinded me from your feelings, and I was too insensitive during the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention. All I was thinking at the time was that I wanted you to officially become my girlfriend in front of all of those people, but in doing so, I neglected to consider your feelings. However, I have to tell you that I don't love you out of pity, and nor have I ever looked down on your background and upbringing. I'm sorry, this is a genuine apology from me. I promise you that I'll do my best to change for you. I'm going to respect you more, and I'm going to love you and cherish you. Can you please forgive me? Xu Xiaowen stared blankly at him for a long while before finally murmuring, idiot. Yue's Sang Yu sat up on the bed. After waking up, he was still feeling a little feeble, but aside from that, he was basically fully recovered. You're right, I'm an idiot. Even earlier today, I was still angry at you. I was still unable to control my laughable pride. When I saw you trapped inside the evil Soul Master's soul skill and on the brink of death, I felt like I was the dumbest person in the world. If you died back then, I would have followed you to the other side. Trust me, I would have fought that evil Soul Master with everything I had, and he would have killed me as well. Xu Xiaowen lowered her head. How could I not trust you? You already used sacrifice for my sake and burned through your life force. Yue's Sang Yu was slightly taken aback to hear this. You found out about that? Xu Xiaowen nodded. You never told me you had such an ability. Yue's Sang Yu smiled in response. Where do you think the pride of my clan comes from? It's not from our regal bloodline. Instead, it's from our sacrificial spirit. For the sake of my friends, I can lay down my life at a moment's notice. This is why members of our Holy Angel clan will never tell their friends that we have such an ability. We'll only use the ability when our friends are in grave danger, and we'll protect them even if it means spending away all of our life force. Xu Xiaowen abruptly raised her head and dove into Yue's Sang Yu's arms as she sobbed. 10 years. That's 10 years of your lifespan. Gone in an instant. Yue's Sang Yu held her in his arms and smiled as he said, 10 years of my lifespan is nothing compared to you. If you can return to my side, I'll be happy for the rest of my life, even if it ends up being 10 years shorter. My days without you are filled with darkness. You're not going to leave me again, are you? Xu Xiaowen murmured. I was yours from the moment you used your sacrifice for me. No matter how you treat me in the future, no matter whether you remain proud, no matter how inferior I feel, I won't leave you ever again. You saved my life, and I'm going to spend the rest of it with you. The best thing about youth was the brilliant recovery speed that came with it, and after a good night's rest, everyone was already completely reinvigorated, with the exception of Yue's Sang Yu, who was still a little pale. What do we do from here onward, boss? By the way, I'm really happy to be able to see you eating like this again, Xu said with a smile. Back in the inner court, everyone cultivated separately, so they rarely ever met one another. In particular, Tang Wuling was in seclusion virtually all the time, so it had been quite a long while since everyone had witnessed his extraordinary appetite in action. Tang Wuling replied, if we're not going to travel by high-speed train, then we have no option other than driving to our destination by soul car. Yue's Sang Yu said, if only we had mechas. Yuan and Louis scoffed. Are you kidding me? Mechas? It wouldn't matter even if we did have mechas. We can't fly them in the Federation unless we get special permission certificates. Those certificates are only handed out to some special departments in the military, so it would be impossible for us to get our hands on them. Xu Xiaowen countered. Don't get so snarky. Sang Yu was only talking in a hypothetical sense. In that case, we'll just have to drive there. Everyone immediately directed their attention towards Xu Xiaowen upon hearing this. Xu Xiaowen was feeling rather uncomfortable from the widespread scrutiny she was receiving. Why are you all looking at me like that? She wore a curious look as he asked. Are you two back together again? Yue's Sang Yu glowered at him. When were we ever not together? There was only a small misunderstanding between us. Exactly. Xu Xiaowen chimed in support. She pursed his lips. All right, you win. Xu Xiaowen wrapped an arm around Yue's Sang Yu's arm with a blissful expression on her face. I heard that our Tang sect has spirit items that can extend one's lifespan. After this military training, Sang Yu and I will do those missions together. Tang Wuling smiled and corrected. We'll all be doing those missions with you. Don't forget that we're a unified team. Yi Xinglan suddenly said, Captain, do you have a plan from here onward? I'm referring to our long-term futures. Tang Wuling replied, I heard a lot of useful information from the Battle God Hall senior yesterday. I learned about the existence of the Battle God Hall from him, as well as many of the unspoken rules on the continent. The Battle God Hall is comprised of the most elite group of soul masters from the Federation, and the Spirit Pagoda most likely also has a similar organization. The organization is kind of like the equivalent to the Battle Hall and Holy Hall of our Tang sect, and the Inner Court and Sea Gods Pavilion of our academy. These organizations are where the most powerful beings on our continent can be found. As the new generation of Shrek 7 monsters, we're automatically regarded as the representatives of the academy, which means that we can't join the Spirit Pagoda or the Battle God Hall. At the same time, we're members of the Tang sect, which is quite close with our academy, and will most likely be staying in the Tang sect for the foreseeable future. Following this military training, all of us should become more powerful, and some of us will most likely have progressed to become 6-ring soul emperors. As such, we should upgrade our suits of battle armor during the upcoming 2 years. Only after becoming 2-word battle armor masters will we truly have the ability to protect ourselves. Suits of 2-word battle armor come with wings, so we won't be limited by a lack of mechas, either. The Federation's radars can restrict mechas, but they can't restrict our wings. Tang Wuling paused here before lowering his head slightly. Also, I have to apologize to all of you. I left for over 3 years, and after coming back, I've been completely absorbed in my own cultivation, so I neglected to train together with all of you. As a result, I've become unfamiliar with your fighting styles, and our teamwork wasn't as good as it could have been. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been in such a perilous situation yesterday. Chapter 802. Everyone glanced at one another, and Xu Lizzie sighed. You're not to blame for this, Captain. We've also been neglecting our team training. After entering the inner court, we've been studying under different teachers and striving to better ourselves, so we haven't been training together anywhere near as frequently as we had in the past. It should indeed become a priority for us to improve in this area, especially now that we're all one-word battle armor masters. Tang Wuling nodded and said, You're right. The teamwork that we still have was all developed 4 years ago. In fact, our synergy is probably even worse than back then because of how rusty we are. The main issue is that we're not familiar with one another's new skills, and that's greatly detrimental to our teamwork. We are Shrek 7 monsters. We're a unified team, a single whole entity. Our combined powers should be greater than the sum of our individual powers. Hence, we have to increase the frequency of our team training during this military training period. Yi Xinglan nodded in response. I agree. Everyone also expressed their approval of this course of action. Thus, Tang Wuling said, "All right, let's set off then. We have to find a car as quickly as possible. Elder Kai stipulated a 15-day deadline for us, and it's not a long time. On top of that, we encountered the unforeseen incident yesterday, and that's delayed us even further. Mu Chen had given Tang Wuling a lot of money, and it wasn't enough to buy a car, but it was definitely enough to rent cars. All they had to do was rent a car in this city, then return the car at the branch of the same company in their destination city. Everyone knew how to drive, so that wasn't an issue, and a 7-seater car was perfect for them. They weren't exactly living the high life, but it was certainly far from uncomfortable in the car. She was responsible for driving while Tang Wuling read the map and gave directions, while everyone else sat in the back. Xu Shaoan and Yue's Heng Yu were still appraising one another like enemies the day before, but they had since become completely inseparable. She hadn't slept well the night before, and the car was traveling quite smoothly, so she quickly fell asleep in Yue's Heng Yu's arms. At our current speed, even if we drive for over 10 hours a day, it'll still take us 4 days to get to our destination. As expected, high-speed soul trains really are faster. Tang Wuling sighed with furrowed brows as he looked down at the map. There's no use thinking about that. What if we have another accident? I think we can safely conclude that you and high-speed trains just aren't meant to be. Boss, Shishi chuckled. The rest of the journey was relatively smooth. At the very least, they didn't encounter any evil soul masters. 4 days later, they arrived at a seaside city situated in the northeastern region of the continent, North Sea City. After traveling across the continent for so many days, the air temperature had dropped significantly. Even though changes in air temperature didn't affect their bodies much at their cultivation ranks, it was still rather cold to them. We're finally here. After arriving at North Sea City, they returned the car to the rental company first, and everyone's expressions were rather weary. They'd been driving for over 10 hours every day, and even though their bodies could handle it, their minds were quite fatigued. Tang Wuling said, "We can't afford to stop here. I can't shake the feeling that the rest of our journey is going to be very difficult. Let me see if I can find out some information about how we can go out to sea and travel to our destination." According to Elder Kai's instructions, the venue for their military training was situated on a small island around 30 kilometers away from North Sea City. If they wanted to get to the small island from where they were, they definitely had to have boats. Taxis are part of the transportation industry. Perhaps taxi drivers will know where we can rent boats from, Shishi suggested as he pointed at the nearby taxi they just emerged from. Tang Wuling said, "That's a good idea." Thus, Shishi went to try his luck. Moments later, he returned with a dark expression on his face. "You were right, boss. It's not going to be easy to get to that island. Do you want to hear what the taxi driver said?" Shishi asked in a slightly speechless manner. Tang Wuling asked, "What did he say?" Shishi replied, "As soon as I told him where we wanted to go, he looked at me as if he was staring at a ghost and asked me if we wanted to die. On top of that, according to them, North Sea City doesn't even have a single dock because the region of the sea next to the city is rife with strong winds and massive waves, and there are large numbers of sea soul beasts there as well. In their words, it's the sea of death." "I knew it," Tang Wuling sighed in a speechless manner. "Not even long-distance ferries can travel through these waters." Yue's Heng Yu asked. Shishi replied, "Long-distance ferries? You're being way too optimistic here. On the northeastern coast, there are only docks large enough for long-distance ferries to stop it in Heaven Sea City and East Sea City. Those cities are way too far away from here, and it would take an eternity for a ferry to travel from there to here. Also, how are we going to convince a ferry to travel through a region of the sea that's renowned for its sea soul beast infestation?" Tang Wuling gave a resigned shrug. "Looks like this is the trial we have to face before we even begin our military training." Yuan and Yui suggested, "Let's go to the seaside first. We have to ascertain just how powerful those sea soul beasts are before we devise a plan. Let's go." Tang Wuling waved a hand, and everyone got on a taxi heading straight toward the eastern coast of North Sea City. The taxi was forced to stop around 5 kilometers away from the coast. Everyone looked on at the 100-meter tall walls that were packed with all types of heavy soul artillery with dumbstruck expressions on their faces. Even though they hadn't even seen the sea yet, they could tell from how heavily guarded these city walls were that the sea soul beasts on the other side definitely had to be extremely fearsome. "Do any of you recognize the soul tools on the wall?" Tang Wuling murmured. He hadn't done much research into soul tools, and he only knew some basic information about them. A wry smile appeared on Shishi's face. "I don't know much about soul tools, but have a look at the foot of the city wall. Those are most likely hyper soul battery arrays. I don't need to elaborate on what those things do, right?" Indeed, in the direction that Shishi was pointing toward, there was a building at the foot of the city wall that had at least 3 extreme warning signs around it. From the shape of the building and the signs around it, it was easy to deduce what this building was. Hyper soul battery arrays were an extremely complex type of super battery with soul arrays as their cores, and they could supply enormous amounts of energy. Generally speaking, they were only used for very powerful soul tools such as large soul barriers. These were the types of soul tools that were used in the military, and they were different from anything used in the academy. Furthermore, there were some ultra-powerful soul cannons that had to be powered using such batteries. With these city walls in place, even making it out of the city would be extremely difficult, let alone traveling over the ocean. This is no golden road. This is a death road. Shu Lizzie said with a wry smile. After a brief stunned stupor, Tang Wuling quickly collected himself. "Let's go back for now." As the captain, he certainly couldn't lead his friends into doing anything reckless. After returning to the city, Tang Wuling got a room in a small hotel, then spread open the map of North Sea City he just brought onto the table. "All right, this red area here should be the area covered by the city wall, and this is a continuous stretch of 50 kilometers along the coast. Some of the sections consist of giant rocks, but aside from that, the city wall stretches over this entire area, and all of the walls are heavily guarded. It's quite clear that they'd definitely be using the most advanced surveillance radars, so it would be next to impossible to sneak over the wall, and we certainly just can't cross over it by force." On the map, the entire region of the sea outside the coastline of the city was annotated with skull symbols, and it was quite obvious what those symbols represented. However, the map that Elder Kai had given them didn't have such annotations. There was only a small island, as well as the straight line distance from the island to North Sea City. The so-called Golden Road was the stretch of distance that had to be covered from North Sea City to the small island. If we can't go over it, then there's only one feasible method open to us. We have to go around it. We have to at least get to the coastline and examine it for ourselves. On top of that, we don't even have any coordinates. All we know is that there's a small island situated 30 kilometers from the coast of North Sea City. Chapter 803. Yuan and Yui said, "Going around the city wall would take a very long time, and the North Sea Legion is situated on the coast. It appears that they've been positioned there with the sole purpose of guarding the city against the sea soul beasts in this region of the sea. If we have to go around the city wall in this legion, we'd have to go extremely far. On top of that, the entire coastline is being monitored by military radars, so we won't be able to double back around along the coastline, which means our only option will be to directly set off for the small island from whichever part of the coast we end up at. Without any coordinates, it'll take a miracle for us to find a small island in the middle of the ocean." Tang Wuling's eyes narrowed slightly in contemplation. "We can't get there via the sea nor via the coast, so our only option would be to fly there." "Fly?" Everyone faltered upon hearing this. Tang Wuling explained, "There have been rapid advancements in the technology of soul planes in the past few years, and they're prohibited from private use, but they're very commonly used in the military. We clearly can't get to our destination by traveling on land or even going over the sea, but if we can get our hands on a soul plane, perhaps we'll be able to fly to the island. A distance of 30 kilometers is nothing for a plane. It won't take us long even if we were to just glide there." Shishi exclaimed, "I'm not sure if you're brave or delusional, boss. Those are soul planes you're talking about. They're heavily monitored by the military and strictly prohibited from private use. Do you know of a place where we can rent planes?" Tang Wuling chuckled. "We definitely can't rent any planes, but who's to say we can't borrow one?" Shishi and Yuan and Yui exchanged a glance, and both of them exclaimed in unison, "You mean from the North Sea Legion?" Indeed, the North Sea Legion was the #1 legion in the northeastern region of the continent, so they would definitely have soul planes. During battles, there was a place for both mechas and soul planes, so neither of them were made redundant by the other. The materials and resources required to construct a mecha would generally be enough to construct 10 soul planes of the same level. Furthermore, planes were faster than mechas, and they could carry more people, as well as soul bombs. Research into soul planes commenced over 100 years ago, and technology in that area had developed at a rapid rate. Now, they had already become an indispensable part of every large military organization. All major legions had their own designated flying squads that worked alongside their mecha squads. It was said that the most advanced soul planes could already fly directly to the Douluo continent or Heaven Dou continent. In terms of technology, the Douluo continent was far more advanced than its two neighbors. However, the Federation had no intention of waging war on the other two continents. Borrowing planes would undoubtedly be the fastest way to their destination, but there was another problem with that plan. They didn't know how to fly planes. Even if we managed to infiltrate infiltrate the base, how are we going to fly the planes out of it and get to the island before we get noticed or even struck down by the military? UA's Heng Yu asked. Tang Wuling replied, we'll need a very good plan. I don't know much about Sol tools, but I do know a thing or two about Sol planes or Sol aircrafts in general. We might not be able to fly a plane, but seeing as we're borrowing a plane already, why don't we borrow a pilot as well? A major legion would normally have long-distance weapons that have a maximum range of around 300 kilometers. If we borrow a plane, as well as a pilot, the legion would be wary of striking us down right away. They'll definitely try to liaise with us first, and as long as we're within the effective range of their weapons, they won't be concerned that we'll be able to escape. Our destination is only 30 kilometers away, so we'll definitely be well within a range of 300 kilometers. For a fighter aircraft, 30 kilometers can be covered in an extremely short time. All we need to do is jump off the plane onto the island and allow the pilot to return the plane to the legion. That way, they won't be inclined to hunt us down, and we'll arrive at our destination. Tang Wuling suddenly discovered that everyone had fallen completely silent around him. They were all staring at him with blank expressions. Shu Lizzie murmured, "Boss, what do you mean by jump off the plane?" Tang Wuling shrugged and replied, "I mean exactly that. We have Seng Yu and Yuanan, both of whom have martial souls capable of flight. Once we reach the air above the island, we'll be able to make use of their flight abilities to glide down onto the island. Even if that doesn't work, we can slow down our descent, and with our own defensive capabilities coupled with that of our suits of one-word battle armor, we'll definitely survive the fall as long as we fall into the ocean rather than onto land." She gulped and mused, "You sure dare to dream, boss. This is the first time the full extent of your imagination and creativity have been displayed to me. Isn't this course of action a little dangerous, though?" Tang Wuling nodded and replied, "It is indeed rather perilous. Firstly, we don't know whether we'll be able to infiltrate the North Sea Legion and find a pilot that'll fly a plane for us. Secondly, we have to hope that the plane doesn't get struck down before we reach the island. Thirdly, we have to defeat any sea soul beasts we come across after landing in the ocean, then rush onto the island. It won't be too dangerous for us if we can't achieve that first objective. With our combat prowess, we should be able to retreat from the Legion with no issues. If worst comes to worst, we can just surrender, so we won't be under any life-threatening danger. As for the second point, I think there's a very slim chance that the North Sea Legion will attack us within a range of 30 kilometers. Even if they do decide to attack, we can just abandon the plane and jump into the ocean right away. As such, the main source of danger comes from the sea soul beasts. The further the plane can fly, the closer we'll get to the island, and the less risk we'll be incurring. Lastly, we have to address the sea soul beasts that we'll potentially encounter. My bloodline aura is able to intimidate all soul beasts, so unless we're extremely unlucky and end up encountering a 100,000-year-old soul beast, we should be able to fight our way through them with no issues. Seng Yu, Yuanan, will you be able to carry the rest of us down from the plane? It's most likely the case that you won't even have to fly, just gliding should suffice. UA's Heng Yu replied, that shouldn't be an issue. With our current powers, we should be able to carry everyone between the two of us and fly for a short period of time. However, the turbulence in the air above the sea may hamper our flight abilities. Tang Wuling turned to Shu Lizzie and asked, how much lighter can your agility mini suit buns make us? Shu Lizzie replied without any hesitation, at least 30%. Yuanan Yui mused, in that case, this plan really does appear to be somewhat feasible. What kind of altitude are you thinking about descending from? Tang Wuling replied, theoretically speaking, the lower the altitude, the better, as that would minimize the time required for our descent. We have to consider the possibility that the North Sea Legion will try to attack us after we jump off the plane, so the less time we spend in the air, the less risk we'll be taking. Yi Zinglan said, all right, this sounds like it could work, but the biggest problem is, how are we going to infiltrate the North Sea Legion and borrow a plane from them? Tang Wuling shrugged in response. This appears to be the most difficult part of the plan, but there are shortcuts that can be taken. I think the most difficult part of this step is making it into the Legion base. After we infiltrate the base, everything will become a lot easier. Regardless of what kind of military organization we're up against, their defenses will mostly target infiltrators trying to sneak in, whereas the inside of the base will be a lot less heavily guarded. Then how will we sneak in? Shu Lizzie asked. Tang Wuling smiled and said, after everything that's happened yesterday, I've learned a valuable lesson. If we're in need of something, we can ask our graduated upperclassmen for help. The Battle God Hall has Shrek Academy alumni, and I'm sure the same applies to the North Sea Legion as well. Shu Shaoan smiled. Captain, have I told you that I really like you when you're brimming with confidence like this? You like him? Yue's Heng Yu asked with a wary look on his face. Shu Shaoan sighed in a resigned manner. I meant like as an admire. Yue's Heng Yu immediately smiled and chimed in that case, I also like it. You're finally beginning to resemble your past self from 4 years ago. Captain, no matter what you propose, we have absolute trust in you. You give us a plan, and we'll follow it to the end. Tang Wuling smiled and said, I think it's wise to be ambitious in our planning, but cautious in our execution. Surely it won't be an issue for us to find a graduated senior in the North Sea Legion. Perhaps we'll really be able to borrow a plane from them. Yi Zinglan asked, how are we going to prove that we're from Shrek Academy? The Academy confiscated everything from us. Tang Wuling replied, that's easy. Our Academy can make inner court disciple badges, so why can't we? You win. A rare smile appeared on Yi Zinglan's face. In reality, Tang Wuling had only just thought of this course of action on the spot, and during their discussion, a lot of the details were gradually finalized. In the beginning, Tang Wuling had considered borrowing by force, but then he suddenly recalled the upperclassmen from the Battle God Hall that he'd met the night before. Not only was Shrek Academy an extremely powerful entity, it also had connections all over the entire continent. The Academy seemed to have embraced neutrality, but it actually had a huge impact on the entire Federation. All of Shrek Academy's alumni, especially those who had graduated from the inner court, were brilliant prodigies, and all of them had a strong sense of belonging to the Academy. Chapter 804. The North Sea Legion had to have Shrek Academy alumni among their ranks, and the first thing that Shrek Academy graduates were assured of was a high starting point. If a Shrek Academy graduate were to join the military, surely they wouldn't start off as a low-ranking soldier. At the very least, they wouldn't be a low-ranking soldier for long before they received promotions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to graduate from Shrek Academy. As long as there were connections within the Legion, things would be made a lot easier. As for an excuse, Tang Wuling had already thought of one. The North Sea Legion was founded 1,600 years ago, so it had a very long history. The North Sea Legion was extremely powerful in battles both in the sea, as well as in the air. The Legion was split up into 3 divisions, which consisted of the North Sea Air Battle Division, the North Sea Land Battle Division, and the North Sea Fleet. The largest of those divisions was the North Sea Fleet, and they were currently in possession of over 30 warships, all of which were situated on the coastline near the base of the North Sea Legion. They were often the main contributors during battles against sea soul beasts. Due to the fact that the sea soul beasts in this region of the sea were virtually the most powerful in the ocean around the entire Douluo continent, this fleet was also the most powerful among all fleets on the continent. North Sea City may not have any docks or piers, but in terms of battle strength, the North Sea Fleet was definitely superior to the East Sea Fleet. The North Sea Fleet was even equipped with some weapons that exceeded the boundaries of normal regulations, and there were a total of over 12,000 soldiers in the fleet, as well as over 30,000 assisting employees in all different lines of occupation. The North Sea Air Battle Division had over 70 planes of different types, and aside from planes, they also had an emergency reaction squad, which was their mecha squad. The Federation's air force was comprised entirely of mechas and fighter aircrafts, and those forces were also split up into many military divisions. As the name suggested, the North Sea Land Battle Division was responsible for battle on land, especially in the form of combating seaside invaders from land. They were mainly equipped with many types of heavy artillery, and they were entirely responsible for North Sea City's coastal defense. They were given the best military equipment by the Federation, and were extremely proficient in warding off sea soul beasts. Most legions prioritize their land battle divisions, and generally have around 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers and employees among their ranks. However, due to the fact that the North Sea Legion required a large number of assisting personnel, there was a total of more than 80,000 people in the entire legion. They were well and truly a massive legion. This was also why military officials in the North Sea Legion were all half a military rank higher than the same level official from other legions. After Tang Wulian and his friends got off the taxi, they were all stunned by the sight that they were greeted by in the distance. The taxi had dropped them off around 1 kilometer away from the North Sea Legion base, as it would be entering the military control zone if it were to draw in closer to the base. The first impression that the North Sea Legion gave them was that there seemed to be no end to it in sight. From their perspective, the North Sea Legion base was surrounded by a massive wire fence that was several dozens of meters tall as opposed to a solid wall. To put it more accurately, this was an electric fence, and any living being that came into contact with it would be welcomed by a jolt of high voltage electricity. From where they were situated, they could see various large military vehicles entering and exiting the base, and as they would cast their eyes even further into the distance, they caught sight of several parked planes, as well as many pieces of military equipment that they couldn't even put a name to. It looks really awesome here. I suddenly think Boss's aspirations to join the army is quite an appealing choice. She said in an excited manner. All men naturally had a soft spot for the military and powerful weapons. With the advancements that soul technology had made throughout history, soul weapons had already become extremely powerful. Even the most powerful soul masters didn't dare to face off directly against the most devastating soul weapons. Powerful military strength was the key prerequisite to everything. At the very least, that was a motto that the Federation clearly swore by. The entire Douluo Federation had a standing army of around 2 million soldiers, as well as 6 major military regions. The North Sea Legion belonged to the Northeastern Military Region, and it had the most powerful navy and air force among the 3 legions in the Northeastern Military Region. Let's go. Just act natural, everyone. Tang Wulian led the group from the front with a smile on his face, and everyone trailed along behind him. They were carrying nothing aside from simple storage cell tools, and Yuanen's damaged hammers had also been stowed away in her storage cell tool. Before they could approach the main gate of the North Sea Legion base, they were stopped in their tracks by a group of patrols. Stop. This is a military control zone. Do not go any further. The patrols had reached them by car, and they clearly already noticed Tang Wulian's group from the base. Tang Wulian strode forward and said, "Hello there. We're students of Shrek Academy, and we're currently on a training mission. The mission assigned to us by our academy is to undertake special military training at your legion. Would you be able to report our arrival to whomever this matter may concern? Shrek Academy." We didn't receive any advance notice about this. The patrolling soldiers weren't that easy to fool. Tang Wulian shrugged in a resigned manner. It wouldn't be a test if our academy had informed your legion beforehand. Truth be told, our academy has assigned us this mission of undertaking special military training, but they didn't give us any assistance. Even just getting into your legion is something that we have to figure out for ourselves. We had no choice but to approach the base and ask if you can organize some special training for us. The soldier raised an eyebrow in a skeptical display. Are you really from Shrek Academy? How can you prove that? Tang Wulian smiled and replied, "That's easy." He made a hand signal to his friends as he spoke, and all 7 of them instantly released their martial souls. 7 soul kings releasing their martial souls at once was a very stunning sight to behold, especially for a group of normal soldiers. The patrol stared at the soul rings appearing one after another before their eyes, and all of them were completely flabbergasted. They were all 5 ring soul kings. Throughout this entire interaction, Tang Wulian and his friends had maintained a perfect triangular battle formation. Tang Wulian stood at the very forefront of the group while 2 rows of 3 people stood behind him. The first row of 3 consisted of Yuan and Yui and Yu Zinglan on either side with Xu Xiaowen in the middle, and the second row of 3 consisted of Yue Tangyu and Xi on either side with Xu Lizzie in the middle. Even though they weren't engaged in a battle, they still habitually maintained their battle formation. In particular, after being forced into such a perilous situation by the evil soul master they battled, everyone had discussed teamwork and synergy extensively during their car trip to North Sea. Tang Wulian stood at the very front, and his 5 soul rings were comprised of 3 purple, 1 black, and 1 green. To put it more accurately, the final soul ring was of a greenish golden color. Even though the patrolling soldiers weren't soul masters, they were still stunned by the sight of Tang Wulian's green soul ring. Furthermore, none of Shrek's 7 monsters possessed even a single soul ring that was below the purple level. They were all 5 ring soul kings of an extremely high caliber, and it was quite clear from their appearance that all of them were only around 20 years of age. The patrolling soldiers in the car were also around the same age as them. Emotions of envy and jealousy almost instantly welled up in their hearts. They were all around the same age, so why was there such a vast disparity between them? The leader of the patrolling soldiers gulped as he recomposed himself, then picked up his military soul communicator to presumably inform their higher-ups of the arrival of Tang Wulian and the others. The main difference between military soul communicators and normal soul communicators was that the former had no dialing function. Each button in the communicator represented a set person that could be contacted, so the soldier only pressed a single button before the call was immediately connected. Report, we've discovered 7 suspicious individuals near our base. They claim to be from Shrek Academy and would like to enter our base to undertake special training. All 7 of them are 5 ring soul kings and around 20 years old. Please advise how we should proceed. After listening to the order from the other side of the line, the soldier immediately replied, "Yes." Thus, the call ended, and the soldier turned to Tang Wulian's group with a peculiar look in his eyes as he said, "Please wait for a moment here. A car will be coming out to take you in shortly." Chapter 805. Tang Wulian and the others all smiled in unison upon hearing this. The fact that they were being granted entry into the base so easily indicated that their judgment had been correct. There had to be Shrek Academy graduates in the Legion base. Furthermore, Shrek Academy was an extremely influential entity on the continent, so inner court graduates were always held in high regard no matter where they went after graduation. Not long after that, another military vehicle was driven out of the base, but there were no patrols on this. Tang Wulian and the others got onto the car, and the car carrying all of the patrolling soldiers traveled toward the base behind the car that they were in. After we get into the base, adapt and react to the situation as it unfolds. Our primary objective is to be able to stay in the base, then contact some high-ranking upperclassmen in the Legion. If we do this in a peaceful manner, then we won't have to borrow a plane, Tang Wulian said in a low voice. Yu Zinglan nodded, and added, "We also have to make sure that we don't get split up. There won't be any issues as long as we can stick together." Tang Wulian nodded in agreement. The North Sea Legion base was simply far too massive. That much was already apparent when they appraised the base from the outside, and they could only imagine that getting split up inside such a massive base would be nothing short of a disaster. Even by car, it took them close to 20 minutes to get to their destination. They were parked in front of a building that had no eye-catching features, but was extremely tall and took up a huge area. After arriving in front of the building, the soldier standing at the door made an inviting hand gesture. Thus, Tang Wulian and his friends entered the building, still maintaining their triangular formation the entire time. Tang Wulian's brows furrowed slightly as soon as he entered the building because this seemed to be a warehouse filled with all types of metal equipment, almost all of which were completely foreign to them. A military official with a second lieutenant badge made his way over to them. "You're from Shrek Academy. Do you have any proof of identification?" Tang Wulian hurriedly handed over the badges they'd made not long ago. The military official glanced at the badges before returning them to Tang Wulian without conducting any further verification. "Come with me." He began to make his way deeper into the warehouse as he spoke. Tang Wulian and his friends clearly had power and courage in equal measure, and they followed along behind the military official without any hesitation nor inhibition. As they strode through the warehouse, they appraised their surroundings with intrigue and curiosity in their eyes, and they discovered that all of the equipment in here appeared to be very advanced. Soon, they caught sight of a massive soul cannon. The silvery white cannon was extremely gigantic, and even though no energy had been injected into it, they could still sense a daunting aura emanating from its gargantuan barrel. After following the military official for close to 100 meters, they arrived at a patch of open space, where another military official was already waiting for them. This military official wore a crisp dark blue military uniform that complemented his handsome facial features. There were 2 rings on each of his military epaulets, in between which was a silver star. 2 rings and 1 star. This man was a major. The major appeared to be just over 30 years of age with a tall and broad figure, and a benevolent smile on his face. "Welcome to the North Sea Legion, prodigies of Shrek Academy." Tang Wulian's heart stirred as he hurriedly stepped forward. "Greetings, senior. Apologies for our unannounced arrival." The major smiled, and replied, "That's all right. Why don't you tell me why you're here?" Thus, Tang Wulian gave the excuse that he'd already given once to the patrolling soldiers outside. The general gist of it was that they wanted to undertake special military training in the North Sea Legion for a period of time in order to complete the mission assigned to them by the Academy. After some careful consideration, we decided the best course of action open to us is to directly approach the Legion base and request to be taken in. Tang Wulian explained with a charismatic smile. He was very handsome, and after withdrawing his golden dragon king bloodline aura, he was a very likable and approachable young man. The major nodded with a smile, and said, "All right, I understand the situation now, but did you consider why Shrek Academy sent you on a mission to train at our North Sea Legion base? In other words, what's so difficult about this mission?" Tang Wulian faltered slightly upon hearing this. The mission was just an excuse that he'd fabricated, as he couldn't tell this man the truth unless he could confirm that the major was willing to help them. What do you mean? Tang Wuling asked with a puzzled look on his face. The major smiled and replied, Shrek Academy would never assign a pointless mission that doesn't challenge its students. Truth be told, you're not the first group of Shrek Academy students to have come here. A group of students from your academy will come here pretty much once every few years, but very few of those groups come to directly visit our base. Most of them would try to find an opportunity to sneak out onto the sea or even steal our aircraft. You are the first group of students that I've seen during my tenure here who have come to visit our base in such a straightforward manner. I have to admit that you all have more confidence and courage than your predecessors. Tang Wuling was suddenly struck by a strong sense of foreboding. Only after hearing the major's words did he realize that he'd made a grave lapse in judgment. They were the first group of Shrek Academy students to have undergone this military training. Many of their seniors from the inner court had also undertaken this military training, and it was uncertain how long this type of training had been going on for. But one thing was certain, at the very least, Elder Kai's generation had undertaken this training in the past. The mission was the same, so everyone obviously faced the same predicament. How were they supposed to get to that small island within the designated time period when the coastline of North Sea City was so heavily guarded? It appeared that they'd completely walked into a trap. Yi Xinglan raised an eyebrow, while Tang Wuling reflexively spread open his arms to protect his friends. What do you want to do then, senior? Tang Wuling asked. Violence wasn't going to resolve the issue here. This major was clearly already aware of the fact that all 7 of them were Soul Kings, yet he was still chatting with them in such a calm, relaxed manner, so he had to have already prepared measures to apprehend them should they turn to violence. Tang Wuling made many judgments in his heart in an instant. The only thing that this man most likely didn't know about them was that they were the current Shrek 7 monsters, and this was the only secret that they could keep from him. The major remarked, not bad. It's quite remarkable that you have such a cool head at such a young age. This may sound like I'm trying to gloat and add insult to injury, but I must tell you that your academy is solely responsible for this situation that you're in. We've already received notification well in advance that 7 Shrek Academy students will be coming, and that your objective will be to reach the demonic island situated around 30 kilometers off the coast. However, it's quite clear that you won't be able to bypass our defensive line. As a legion, we have a duty to protect the citizens of the Federation and prohibit all people from approaching the coastline. According to the information Shrek Academy gave us, you have to get to the demonic island within 15 days of your departure from the academy, and failure to do so will result in severe consequences. Hence, we won't do anything to you. We'll just detain you in the detention center of our base, then release you at the conclusion of the 15 days. Tang Wuling's expression had darkened significantly upon hearing this. The academy had completely screwed them over and sold them out. Were they expected to oppose an entire legion? The major smiled and said, it's a very wise decision on your part to be treating this situation calmly. Otherwise, if you dare to attack me, you'll be attacking the military of the Federation, which is a crime equivalent to treason. In that case, I can have all of you killed and still have full justification. However, the fact that you've refrained from attacking me means that all of you will only have to suffer imprisonment for a few days. All right, that's enough talking. Please surrender yourselves now. Surrender. Humph. Yue's Heng Yu harumphed coldly. The major raised an eyebrow. Are you planning to resist? You can give it a try. Actually, before you do that, I advise you to look around first. Tang Wuling didn't even have to appraise his surroundings to sense that metal cannon barrels were slowly extending toward them from all corners of the warehouse. He didn't know what kind of cannons these were, but from the length and size of their barrels, he could tell that these were extremely fearsome weapons. Tang Wuling immediately instructed, don't move, everyone. The major smiled and ordered, put on some soul-sealing handcuffs for our guests. A group of soldiers immediately rushed over to Tang Wuling and the others, and each of them was carrying a rectangular metal box that was around a foot wide and half a foot tall. The major goaded, if you want to resist, it's still not too late. Tang Wuling heaved a dejected sigh. I didn't think it would be like this. The academy is far too sinister. But then again, we've been taught an important lesson here, so this trip wasn't a complete waste. We've lost, and that's that. But we won't make the same mistake next time. Don't resist, everyone. We've fallen into their hands already, and resisting will only incur unnecessary danger. He voluntarily raised both of his hands up into the air as he spoke. One of the soldiers hovered his metal box above Tang Wuling's hands, and the box quickly split open before sealing back together again around Tang Wuling's wrists. All of a sudden, a strong numbing sensation shot through his wrists, and his body shuddered as all of his soul power was completely sealed away. Everyone reluctantly followed Tang Wuling's order in the end, and they were also fitted with these soul-sealing handcuffs. Chapter 806. A hint of despair appeared on Xu Xiaoyuan's face. I feel so bad. What do we do, Captain? Her voice was beginning to choke up, as if she were on the verge of bursting into tears. Don't worry, everything will be fine. The worst-case scenario is that we'll fail this mission and be forced to accept our punishment. We haven't done anything, so the North Sea Legion won't hurt us even though we've been detained. After all, the Academy knows we're here, and we haven't attacked anyone or stolen anything, so we haven't committed any crimes. The Major smiled and said, you've made the right decision. Take them away and detain them. Oh, by the way, I graduated from Imperial Sun Moon Soul Engineer Academy, as did virtually all of the high-ranking officials of the North Sea Legion, so we've always abhorred Shrek Academy. You didn't think that the Legion situated in the northeastern region would have such strong ties with the Imperial Sun Moon Soul Engineer Academy in the west, did you? Do you know about the relationship between these two academies? How could they not know? Back in the day, Tang Wuling had once led his friends to challenge the Imperial Sun Moon Soul Engineer Academy. Tang Wuling lowered his head in a resigned and indignant manner. Not only had they walked into a trap, the people that had sprung the trap had a personal vendetta against them as well. The Major continued, stop putting on that fake resigned display. I really hate your Shrek Academy, but I can tell you're all definitely inner court disciples, so you must all be one-word battle armor masters to go along with your 5-ring cultivation ranks. Don't even think about getting away. I won't give you any chances. No matter what kind of pitiable display you put on, I won't take pity on you. Put some spirit sealing helmets on them as well. There's no way they'll be able to escape then. With those helmets on, you won't even be able to think. So just take a good nap for about 10 days here, and I promise you that I'll definitely release you at the conclusion of the 10 days. Perhaps you'll be quite hungry by then, but you definitely won't die. Tang Wuling abruptly raised his head at the sight of the helmets the soldiers were carrying toward them, and a panicked expression appeared on his face. No, you can't do this. You. Ugh. As soon as the helmet was fitted onto his head, a powerful magnetic field completely scattered his cognitive functions, and he slumped straight to the ground. Everyone else had their soul power sealed, so there was no way for them to resist. As such, they were also fitted with the same helmets and fell unconscious as well. The Major shrugged. This is how things should be. Students of Shrek Academy are all extremely cunning, so I can't give them even the slightest opportunity. These spirit sealing helmets will completely seal off your minds, so just sleep like good boys and girls. I wonder if your academy will actually expel you after this. Don't blame me for all of this. If there's anyone you should blame, it's Shrek Academy for being too heartless with its students. Take them to the detention center and release them in 10 days. 14 soldiers immediately rushed forward at once, splitting up into groups of 2 before quickly carrying away Tang Wuling and his friends. The Major stroked his chin with a contemplative look on his face and said, get the special operation unit to search the area around the base and use the radars to see if they have any allies lurking outside the base. In particular, make sure to detect for the presence of mechas. Yes, Major. The Major was always renowned as a very methodical and thorough man, so he certainly wasn't going to allow any oversights. The dark detention chambers were the places that soldiers were most afraid of. There was nothing inside the rooms, and each room was only 2 feet tall, making it impossible for one to sit up, and the rooms were completely devoid of light. There were only small openings through which food could be delivered, and the most terrifying thing about these detention chambers was that there was absolutely nothing in them. For normal people, being able to last 7 days in here was already an extremely remarkable feat, as being enclosed in dark and claustrophobic spaces for long periods of time will inevitably lead to mental breakdowns. Thus, Tang Wuling and his friends lay in silence in a detention chamber with handcuffs around their wrists and helmets on their heads. After a long while, a pair of hands slowly rose up within the dark space before gently grabbing onto a helmet, then slowly wrenching it apart. That's right, the helmet was literally being wrenched apart. Normally, these helmets couldn't be opened without their corresponding keys and electronic passcodes, but this helmet was being torn apart by a pair of their hands. Due to the restriction from the pair of handcuffs, the process wasn't very smooth, but in the next instant, the pair of hands jerked violently, and the handcuffs were instantly shattered, while the helmet was also completely prized apart in the process. The one who had just struggled out of the helmet and handcuffs was none other than Tang Wulin, and he flexed his wrists as he gradually regained control over his own soul power, upon which faint purple light emanated from his eyes. He inspected his surroundings and heaved a faint sigh of relief after ascertaining that all of his friends were also present in the same detention chamber. After taking a few moments to ascertain who was who, he prized open Shishi's handcuffs and helmet first, then immediately covered Shishi's mouth with his hand. Shishi's body shuddered, and Tang Wulin immediately whispered, "Don't talk." Shishi immediately understood what was going on, and as his cognitive functions returned, he began to quickly recover his own soul power. Tang Wulin replicated this process, breaking the handcuffs and helmets being worn by all of his friends. Why wasn't his mind sealed by the helmet? In reality, he hadn't done anything remarkable to achieve this. It was undoubtedly the case that the soul-sealing handcuffs could seal off one's soul power. Even soul masters more powerful than him wouldn't be able to avoid the handcuffs from taking effect. However, it was important to remember that Tang Wulin still had immense blood essence power. In the instant before the helmet was fitted onto his head, he immediately circulated his blood essence power into his head to form a protective barrier. If the Major could have seen Tang Wulin's head through the helmet, he would have definitely known that his mind hadn't been sealed as golden dragon veins had appeared all over his head. With his blood essence acting as an impeding barrier, it was naturally impossible for the helmet to take effect, and the rest was very simple. After everything had gone quiet for a while, Tang Wulin immediately removed everyone's helmets and handcuffs. The academy is being way too heartless. Shishi couldn't help but whisper. Everyone was breathing slightly heavier than normal. Indeed, the academy hadn't just chosen North Sea City for no good reason. They were using the North Sea Legion here to screw everyone over. No wonder everyone who knew about the nature of the military training was so sympathetic toward them. They hadn't even reached the island yet, and they were already in this horrible situation. Complaining isn't going to do us any good. At the very least, this is not the worst situation we can be in. We're still in the base, which is better than being thrown out of it. Shishi, send out one of your clones to investigate. Tang Wulin rolled over to the entrance of the detention chamber as he spoke. This was a very small yet extremely heavy door that was locked from the outside. Tang Wulin narrowed his eyes as he focused his attention to detect the situation outside. In doing so, he discovered that there were no guards positioned outside the chamber. Perhaps they were so confident in the effect of the soul-sealing handcuffs and spirit-sealing helmets that they thought guards were simply redundant. However, Tang Wulin didn't grow complacent because of this. Make sure to be careful when you send your clone out of here. All you have to do is find out what places in the base have soul planes. There must be many security measures in this base. Things like thermal imaging scanners won't be able to catch you, but your clone will be susceptible to energy analysis devices. If someone catches you, immediately dissipate your clone. They won't suspect that we're behind this anyway. Make sure to take every precaution necessary, and do your best to bring back some useful things. All right, leave it to me, Shishi replied with a nod. Tang Wulin reached out with his right hand, but he wasn't planning to open the door of the detention chamber. Instead, he made his way over to the side of the chamber. This is an air vent. I'll remove its cover so you can get out through here. I can sense using my spiritual power that this vent has a very small diameter that a normal person will get stuck in, but your clone should be able to make it through, right? Shishi nodded and replied, for sure. I can compress my clones as they're constructed from energy, and they can pass through any space as long as it's no thinner than an arm. Chapter 807. All right, let's do this. Tang Wulin's golden dragon claws made short work of the air vent, and one of Shishi's soul rings flashed to conjure up a shadow dragon clone holding his shadow dragon dagger. The clone entered the air vent in a completely soundless manner, and under Shishi's control, the clone's body contracted before squirming through the air vent, and it wasn't long before it reached the other side. The clone appeared in a corridor with detention chambers on both sides. Shishi appraised his surroundings to find that there was no one around. He carefully strode forward with his body pressed tightly up against a wall, diligently surveying his surroundings with every step that he took. This was a clone that Shishi could rule out of existence at any moment, so he wasn't afraid of being discovered, but if he did get discovered, he had to make sure that he was further away from these detention chambers. Otherwise, the people in the North Sea Legion base would suspect that they had escaped. Thankfully, there were no energy analysis devices here. The detention chambers only existed to detain soldiers who had broken military rules, so this area wasn't exactly a confidential zone. There weren't even any password-activated doors or anything of that nature that separated this area from the rest of the base, so Shishi was able to make it out very smoothly. At this point, night had already fallen, but the North Sea Legion base was still brightly lit, and soldiers were running through the area from time to time. Shishi hid in a dark corner and silently observed the scenes unfolding before his eyes. At his current cultivation rank, the furthest sustainable distance his clones could stray away from him was around 1 kilometer. If they were to stray out of this range, then it would take several times more soul power and spiritual power to control them. This place was simply far too massive, and Shishi had no way of ascertaining his current location. Thankfully, he caught sight of a plane very quickly. Not far away from the detention chambers, a warehouse gate slowly opened, and a plane that had just returned from a flight slowly descended before parking itself in the warehouse. What was even more encouraging to Shishi was that there were only 2 walls that separated this warehouse from the detention chamber. Shishi quickly rushed into the warehouse just in time to see the aircraft canopy slowly opening, following which 4 pilots disembarked from the plane. Shishi leapt onto the plane and craned his neck for a better view. In doing so, he discovered that this was a 4-seater fighter aircraft that wasn't all that spacious. The devices and apparatus in the plane were quite complex, and all of the lights on the pilot panel were gradually being switched off. The 4 pilots seemed to be engaged in a pleasant conversation as they got off the plane. The aircraft's canopy slowly sealed shut again, and Shishi turned to discover that there was another plane of the same model in the warehouse. Shishi's eyes narrowed as he silently jumped off the plane before quickly returning to the detention chamber. After listening to Shishi's recount of what he'd seen, Tang Wulin contemplated their options for a moment before musing. This is indeed a good opportunity, but I don't think it'll be that easy for us to fly the planes out of this base. It would be best for us to wait until these planes are scheduled to fly out for missions, so the warehouse will be open and the people in the base won't suspect anything. However, the problem there is that in order for this to work, we can't just kidnap a pilot right away as that would immediately blow our covers, but the insides of the planes are too small for us to hide in. Shishi said. After those pilots disembarked, specialized maintenance staff came into the warehouse to examine the condition of the plane. I'd assume that the maintenance personnel will be back again to check the planes prior to their next flight. Yue Sang said, the main advantage in using fighter aircraft lies in how fast they are. At full speed, they can cover 30 kilometers in an instant. However, the problems with fighter aircraft are that there's too little space in them, and we need professional pilots to fly them. There's not enough space for all of us in one fighter aircraft, and the chances that both planes will be flown at the same time are too slim. Helicopters or cargo planes will have enough space for all of us, but it takes too long for them to get off the ground, and will most likely be detained before we can even leave the base. Tang Wulin asked, Shishi, if we exclude a pilot from our plans, do you think it's possible that we'll all be able to fit in one fighter aircraft? A peculiar look appeared on Shishi's face. It'll be very difficult. There are only 4 seats and 7 of us. Lizzie will most likely have to take up more than 1 seat by himself, so I don't think there's any chance we can all fit in there. Tang Wulin's eyes narrowed slightly as he said, if they're 4-seater planes, then this might still work, but the prerequisite for that is that we have to be able to fly the planes ourselves. Fly the planes ourselves? Tang Wulin said, piloting a plane will definitely be more complex than driving a soul car, but it may not be much more complex than piloting a mecha. In fact, it could even be slightly easier. Kidnapping a pilot is far too unpredictable a course of action for us to take. We'll only get 1 chance. So what if we encounter a pilot that would rather die than surrender? Hence, I have an idea. Are you proposing that we fly the planes ourselves? But who's going to fly them? Yi Zingwen asked. Tang Wulin turned to Shishi and said, we still have 9 days, and I'm sure the planes in that warehouse will be flown again at some point during the next 9 days. Go and observe the pilots as they take off, and carefully learn what they're doing. You don't need to learn everything. All we need is to be able to get the planes to take off, accelerate, and change directions. We only need to fly for 30 kilometers. Shishi's eyes widened as he stared at Tang Wulin. Boss, aren't you afraid that we'll crash and die? Do you have that much trust in me? Tang Wulin shrugged in response. We might crash, but with Tang Yu and Yuanen's flying abilities, I'm sure we won't die. However, if we fail, then we won't be able to make it to the military training venue on time, so it's all on your shoulders. Shishi gulped nervously. No pressure, right? Tang Wulin said. We still have some time, so we have to make this plan as airtight as possible. We'll need you to work hard for the next few days, Shishi. Observe the pilots and make sure to take in every single detail. During the next few days, people from the North Sea Legion would come over to the detection chambers every day to check that Tang Wulian and the others were still being detained. And during those times, everyone would put on their damaged helmets and handcuffs again to put on an act. The detention chambers were extremely short, so it wasn't like the soldiers could walk in and carefully inspect their condition. The patrolling soldiers would only take a cursory glance at them to make sure that they were still present and lying down in silence before departing. 7 days passed by, and on this day, Shishi silently returned again. What's the situation like? Tang Wulian asked in a quiet voice. Shishi replied, I can confirm that the 2 planes in the warehouse fly out every day, once in the morning and once at night, to complete recon missions. I've already memorized the procedures required to get the planes off the ground and to reach full acceleration. When do we implement our plan? Tang Wulian took a deep breath. We've perfected this plan as much as we could during the limited time afforded to us, and all that's left is the execution. This is indeed quite a perilous undertaking, but we're Shrek 7 monsters. We can't just scurry back with our tails between our legs. We put the plan into motion tomorrow at dawn. Dawn should be a better time to act than at night, as that's when the soldiers on guard duty will be at their most weary. The next morning, as the captain of the aviation team, Lu Fu was the first to arrive at the warehouse. He greeted the maintenance staff, who had just finished examining the planes in the warehouse, and he stood below his own plane, looking up at it with a blissful expression. He had always loved planes and the feeling of soaring through the sky ever since he was a small child. He was only a normal person, so in order to become a qualified pilot, he had to endure a lot of arduous training. Through his tireless efforts, he finally became a pilot 5 years ago. In the beginning, he was only a student pilot, and now, he is the captain of the aviation team. Throughout this process, he had put in countless hours of effort, and he truly loved aviation. The plane before him was the newest model aircraft from the Federation, the Skyglide 17. It was among the 17th generation of battle aircrafts. The plane had a turbojet engine that could allow it to break the sound barrier within 26 seconds at maximum acceleration. It also came with 4 soul vanquishing cannons that could unleash a continuous barrage of attacks, and it can also hold 8 soul missiles that could unleash devastating assaults from long range. This was the newest generation of fighter aircraft, and it could attack targets in the air and on land, as well as at sea. After all of the fighter aircrafts in the Legion had been replaced by this newest model 6 years before, they had been performing very consistently and were renowned for their extremely impressive speed and offensive power. They were most suited to assisting mechas in unleashing prolonged assaults, and to providing artillery support to the military mecha teams. Each Skyglide 17 battle aircraft was 36 meters long with a 29-meter wingspan. Equipped with a turbojet engine, they had to glide for 900 meters before being able to take off. These figures had been cemented into Lu Fu's mind long ago, as he truly loved his battle aircraft, and he was familiar with every single one of its minute details. A complete aviation team consisted of 4 people, which undertook the roles of captain, vice captain, cannon shooter, and missile shooter. The captain was mainly responsible for flying the plane, while the vice captain was responsible for providing directions, contacting the base, and controlling the radars. As for the cannon and missile shooters, their roles were quite self-explanatory. This was why each Skyglide 17 aircraft had to have 4 pilots. Chapter 808. With the rapid advancements in fighter aircraft technology nowadays, the trend was that fewer and fewer people were required to pilot these planes. With the development of sole artificial intelligence, it was said that the next generation of battle aircrafts would only require 2 people to control the functions that 4 people were currently required to control. Lu Fu examined his own aviation suit. As a normal person, he required an aviation suit and a helmet to withstand the impact flying at such high speeds had on his body, so he couldn't afford to have equipment failures. He had always been a very cautious and methodical man, which was an important reason behind his journey to becoming an exceptional pilot. Captain. 3 other people in the same aviation suit that he was wearing made their way into the warehouse. They were none other than his 3 co-pilots. Lu Fu wore a faint smile on his face as he greeted them from afar. However, just as he was about to give them a wave, his hand stiffened in midair as he was stunned to discover that a figure had descended from up above, following which all 3 of his companions fell to the ground in the blink of an eye, completely unconscious. Enemy attack. Lu Fu instantly realized what was happening, yet just as he opened his mouth and was about to scream, he also blacked out and slumped down onto the ground. Examine the surrounding area. A low voice commanded. Several figures immediately emerged before quickly assessing the surrounding area. They were all lurking in the shadows, so they remained out of sight. Due to the fact that a flight mission was imminent, the warehouse gate was already open, so people on the outside could see into the warehouse. The 4 aviation team members were quickly dragged away into discreet corners, and several people gave a thumbs-up gesture to the man who had just spoken. Shishi, board the plane. Tang Wulian waved a hand toward Shishi. Shishi quickly rummaged around Lu Fu's body before producing a remote with a circular button on it. At the same time, he removed Lu Fu's helmet before placing it onto his own head. After he pressed the button on the remote, the canopy of the battle aircraft slowly opened. That's right, the ones who had attacked the aviation team were none other than Shrek 7 monsters. Of course, they hadn't killed the 4 pilots. All they had done was knock them out. At this moment, expressions of anxiety and excitement could be seen on the faces of all of Shrek's 7 monsters. They were borrowing a plane. On top of that, none of them had even traveled on a battle aircraft before. This was no joke. They were doing something that was most definitely illegal. Of course, as long as they could make it out of the Legion base, the Academy would take care of the repercussions for them. After all, they were only carrying out instructions from the Academy, so they didn't feel guilty about what they were doing. Shishi was the first to spring onto the plane before sitting down on the main pilot's seat. Yi Zingguan also got on and sat beside him in the co-pilot's position. All of their positions had already been ascertained in advance. Tang Wulian jumped onto one of the wings of the aircraft before wrapping a blue-silver emperor vine around Shu Lizzie's body, then abruptly dragging the vine back and swinging Shu Lizzie into the air, getting him to land in the cockpit with unerring accuracy. Shu Shaowen was also carried into the cockpit by Yue Hengyu at almost the exact same moment. Shishi's hands were quickly flying over the flight control panel, and he said, "Boss, we need fingerprint and pupil identification." Tang Wulian waved a hand through the air, and another blue-silver emperor vine shot forth before wrapping itself around Lu Fu's wrist. Then also hurling him through the air, another blue-silver emperor vine shot forth, winding itself around Lu Fu's body before dragging him down toward Tang Wulian. Tang Wulian carried Lu Fu and sprang onto the thin head of the plane and handed Lu Fu over to Shishi. Shishi quickly pressed Lu Fu's finger against the fingerprint verification device, then gently brushed back one of his eyelids and pressed his head against the pupil verification device. Beep, beep, beep. 3 electronic beeping tones sounded, and all of the devices in the cockpit instantly lit up. There were also all types of notification lights that were displaying the aircraft's current condition. Shishi exulted. Done. Tang Wulian flicked his wrist, and the blue-silver emperor vine carried Lu Fu back into the dark corner again. Run through the pre-flight checks as quickly as possible. According to the official time that we're scheduled to take off, we still have around a minute left before verification. During these past few days of observations, they had already grasped all of this information, and the entire plan was accurate down to the nearest second. Shishi quickly pressed one button after another before giving Tang Wulian a hand gesture to indicate that everything was ready. Thus, Tang Wulian sprang up and landed behind the cockpit as he instructed. Sengyu, Yuanan, take your positions. Yue Hengyu and Yuanan Yui were currently situated on either wing of the aircraft. The cockpit only had enough capacity for 4 people, so they could only fly using this special method. Blue-silver emperor vine spread from Tang Wulian's body, extending all the way to the wings of the aircraft. At the same time, the canopy slowly closed to seal Shishi and the others within the cockpit. Yuan Yui and Yue Hengyu were lying flat on either wing, allowing the blue-silver emperor vines to tie them to the wings. Tang Wulian also secured himself with his own blue-silver emperor vines, except he was situated at the center of the aircraft, and it was as if he were riding it like a massive mechanical flying horse. After the blue-silver emperor vines had strapped the 3 of them securely to the aircraft, Tang Wulian gently tapped the canopy 3 times. The canopy was already closed, so no verbal communication could take place between those who were inside the cockpit and those who were outside. As such, they could only communicate through taps and hand signals. Shu Shaowen was seated at the rear of the cockpit, and she was responsible for observing Tang Wulian's hand signals. Shishi couldn't help but burst into giddy laughter. We're about to take flight, guys. This is my first flight. I'm so excited. You better be careful. Don't forget that Yuanan is still strapped to the wing of the aircraft. Yi Xingling reminded in a cold voice. Don't worry, I know. Tang Wolin, Yuan and Yui, and Yue Heng's positions had also been discussed in advance. Tang Wolin had the most powerful body among the three, and he was also the captain, so he naturally had to take the most dangerous spot at the center of the plane. In contrast, Yuan and Yui both had wings and flight capabilities, so even if they were to somehow be detached from the plane due to unforeseen circumstances, they could still ensure they didn't fall to their deaths. As such, it was naturally the best choice for them to also be outside the cockpit. Shishi mimicked the motions required to control the aircraft before pressing a red button as he yelled, ignition. All of a sudden, the aircraft shuddered, and a loud buzzing sound also rang out as the turbojet propeller began to rotate at a high speed. Powerful air currents surged forth from within the propeller, slowly guiding the aircraft forward. Right at this moment, an urgent voice sounded from Shishi's earpiece. Sky 9, why did you go into ignition early? Please respond. He immediately lowered his voice to make it sound deeper, and replied, there's been a minor malfunction in the aircraft, and the maintenance staff have asked me to try and conduct ignition. Why didn't you report the malfunction to us? You've made an elementary error. The voice in the earpiece scolded. My apologies, Shishi replied. I command you to cease ignition right away and await further instructions. Yes. Shishi gave an affirmative response, but the aircraft had already traveled out of the warehouse. Shishi was undoubtedly a complete novice when it came to piloting this aircraft, but after watching Luffy operate it for so many days in a row, he had definitely grasped the basics. After exiting the warehouse, the plane only had to travel for about 300 meters, then take a right turn before it could get to the runway and prepare for takeoff. Sky 9, what are you doing? Why have you exited the aircraft hangar? The infuriated voice rang out from the earpiece again. Shishi suddenly raised his voice a few octaves to feign shock and horror as he replied, the control system has gone completely out of control. Please send assistance. Shishi's voice acting skills were exemplary, and he didn't even sound like himself right now. Even Yi Xingling was rather surprised by this hidden talent of his. Chapter 809. Don't panic. Try to control the aircraft to the best of your abilities. The repair vehicle will reach you soon. Try not to cause any collisions before that. The voice in the earpiece suddenly calmed down. Of course he was going to control the aircraft. However, he was going to control it so that it could take flight as quickly as possible. Shishi pushed the acceleration shaft forward, and due to the fact that the aircraft had picked up too much speed prior to the right turn, it did it slightly during the turn, and the two wings trembled slightly, but it had reached the runway at a far higher speed than it normally would. Sky 9, we are issuing a warning to you right now. Who are you, and how dare you hijack a military aircraft? This is a crime punishable by death. I repeat, punishable by death. Stop right now, or our base will strike you down. The voice in the headpiece suddenly turned extremely cold. Shishi faltered slightly upon hearing this. How had their cover been blown so quickly? He had thought that his voice acting was superb. All of a sudden, Shu Lizzie plucked down something from the ceiling of the cockpit. I think this is what has exposed us. It was a small camera, and it was undoubtedly broadcasting the scenes unfolding in the cockpit straight to the control tower. Yi Xingling urged, hurry, I know. Shishi pressed the acceleration shaft forward as far as it would go. There was not enough time to get onto the runway as lap sirens had already run out, and he could see that barricades were slowly rising up in the distance. Even if they could get onto the runway, there was no way that they'd be able to take flight with those barricades in place. A cold light flashed through Shishi's eyes, and he grabbed onto the acceleration shaft before abruptly wrenching it back. All of a sudden, a terrifying burst of propulsion force instantly slammed the 4 people in the cockpit into the backs of their seats, while the 3 people outside the cockpit were instantly buffeted by extremely fierce air currents. Tang Wolin roared, battle armor. Yuan and Yui Heng immediately released their suits of battle armor in unison, and Tang Wolin also did the same. Only after summoning their suits of battle armor were they able to better withstand the buffeting air currents. The aircraft suddenly accelerated, and this was not a smooth acceleration. The aircraft literally left the ground for a split second from the force of the abrupt acceleration before being launched forward like a cannonball. They were currently on a smooth runway, but this was not the real runway. They were over 300 meters away from the real runway. Beside the runway was a patch of lawn. It was still relatively smooth, but it certainly wasn't as hard as the ground on the real runway. Orange flames began to erupt from the rear of the aircraft, and the distance of 300 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. The aircraft rushed onto the lawn in an instant, and Shishi let loose an almighty roar as he pulled back the control shaft with all his might. The lawn was only around 400 meters in length, and if they were to go any further than that, they'd be crashing into the barracks up ahead. If they couldn't take off, then they would crash the aircraft. It was as simple as that. The 4 people in the cockpit also released their suits of battle armor in unison. No one wanted to die, but they had to take this risk, and the only way to minimize their chances of death would be to release their battle armor. Arg! An ear-piercing scream erupted from Shu Shaolan's mouth, and the aircraft shuddered violently as it sped over the lawn. They were about to reach the conclusion of the lawn at any second now, and a thick concrete wall stood directly up ahead, rapidly expanding in their field of view. Right at this moment, the aircraft gave one final violent shudder before its immense propulsion force completely erupted. The tip of the plane jerked upward, and all of the tremor suddenly stopped. The concrete wall up ahead also seemed to have sunk downward, and a loud screeching noise rang out from the underside of the aircraft, but in the next instant, they were still able to make it into the air. Woohoo! We did it! Shishi yelled with excitement and elation. Didn't you hear that crash? Hurry up and examine the extent of the damage. Yi Xingling roared in an enraged voice as she pointed at the flashing lights on the control panel. Shishi glanced at the vast array of flashing lights before shrugging as he replied, I'm sorry, but I don't know what any of this means. Did you really expect me to be some kind of expert pilot after watching those guys for a few days? In any case, what I can tell you is that we've taken off. Haha. It's time to accelerate. He abruptly wrenched the control shaft, and the aircraft quickly ascended. The enraged voice rang out from Shishi's earpiece again. Turn back right now or we'll strike you down. This is not a warning, it's an order. Right at this moment, soul lasers flashed through the air, putting on a dazzling display of lights. It was quite clear that these attacks were being unleashed as a warning to them. Strike down if you dare. Let me tell you this, we're the current Shrek 7 monsters. If we die, Shrek Academy will stomp your base into the ground. Shishi roared before quickly turning off the communicator. At the control tower of the North Sea Legion base, the entire place was in a state of complete turmoil. The surveillance system revealed to them that a Skyglide 17 aircraft had successfully taken off after traveling for only 700 meters over the preliminary runway, followed by a stretch of lawn. Even though they'd been discovered in time, everything had happened far too abruptly, and no one had been able to react to this sudden development as it was completely unprecedented. When they heard the words Shrek 7 monsters, all of the employees present were completely rooted to the spot. The major that had lured Tang Wolin and the others into the trap was right. The North Sea Legion was like the backyard of the Imperial Sun Moon Soul Engineer Academy. However, it was exactly because of this that all of these people were even more aware of just what Shrek Academy represented. There was not even a single Shrek Academy graduate in the North Sea Legion, and that was an entirely political decision. There was no way they could have managed to achieve this without the support of the Federation. After all, everyone knew that the most exceptional soul masters on the continent came from Shrek Academy. Regardless of how much they detested Shrek Academy, they were most definitely aware of what the words Shrek 7 monsters entailed. They were the brightest prodigies of Shrek Academy. If Shrek 7 monsters were to die here, the entire Federation would be shaken. The highest ranking official in the control tower, Wu Ming, wore a thunderous expression. What the hell is going on? When did Shrek 7 monsters infiltrate the North Sea Legion base? He had only received information from the base stating that a few Shrek Academy spies had been detained, and that they were going to be placed in detention for a few days before being released. However, the report from that major clearly stated that those spies had been fitted with soul-sealing handcuffs and spirit-sealing helmets, so how had they managed to hijack an aircraft? What do we do, Colonel? All of the employees in the control tower were looking at Lu Ming. Lu Ming's breathing was slightly brisk as he ordered, contact the general right away. The leader of the North Sea Legion, Lieutenant General Shen Yue, was one of the brightest young stars in the current military. She was only 38 years old, yet she was already a lieutenant general, and the Federation had broken many conventions to promote her to such a high level at her age. That's the gist of the current situation. General, please give us your instructions. Colonel Lu Ming reported the situation in the most concise way possible. The other side of the line was silent for a moment before a response came through. Deploy the Sky Aviation Squad and the North Sea Legion's first mega squad to ensure their safety. If possible, force them to turn around, but if they insist on getting away, then still make sure that they do so safely. Understood. There was too much weight behind the words Shrek 7 monsters. Even a lieutenant general who was far from a fan of Shrek Academy didn't dare to let Shrek's 7 monsters die on her territory. Shen Yue stood in her office in a military uniform. She was around 170 centimeters tall, and her back was ramrod straight. The passage of time hadn't left many marks on her face, and she appeared to only be around 30 years old. Furthermore, she was very beautiful. During her days studying at the Imperial Sun Moon Sol Engineer Academy, she was considered to be the #1 beauty of the academy. Get Major Bing Feng to come and see me, Shen Yue commanded as she pressed a button on the table. Shrek's 7 monsters, eh? Shen Yue's brows were tightly furrowed. They had indeed received information that inner court disciples from Shrek Academy would be arriving here as part of a mission, and she was well aware of this tradition of Shrek Academy. She had even tried to deploy people to that demonic island in the past. As the supreme leader of the North Sea Legion and the vice commander of the Northeastern Military Region, she was an extremely influential figure in the military, especially in the North Sea Legion. However, her actions were quickly met by strong backlash from her higher-ups. As such, that island was a mystery to her. Now, there were more people from Shrek Academy traveling to the island, and on this occasion, they were proclaiming themselves to be Shrek 7 monsters. If that really were the case, then things would be quite troublesome. Shrek Academy had always been renowned for how protective it was toward their students. If Shrek 7 monsters were to perish here, there was no explanation that she could give that would alleviate the wrath of Shrek Academy. Shrek 7 monsters weren't just selected at random. They could only be selected after a certain period of time had passed following the retirement of the previous generation of Shrek 7 monsters. Furthermore, they were selected with quality as the priority over quantity, and if there weren't suitable disciples to take up the mantle, the positions would simply be left vacant rather than be filled by disciples who weren't good enough. Chapter 810. All of the past generations of Shrek 7 monsters were comprised of superb prodigies, and there was once a special incident that resulted in the death of 2 members of one of the past generations of Shrek 7 monsters. On that occasion, Shrek Academy was like a hibernating beast that finally awoke from its slumber and bared its fangs to the world. A terrifying revenge operation ensued, and that piece of history was still clear in the minds of many people. Shen Yue had seen from strictly confidential military documents that the incident had forced the Federation to change 16 of its parliamentary members. No one in the general public knew what had happened, but that incident had completely shaken up the hierarchy of the entire federal parliament. As for exactly what the incident was, there were no specific records. It was only stated that the repercussions had been extremely severe. All of the people who were related to the deaths of those 2 members of Shrek 7 monsters suffered negative consequences to varying degrees, and that incident had further cemented Shrek Academy's status as one of the most powerful entities on the entire continent. At this moment, the aircraft that Shishi and the others were on had already risen into the air, and the Skyglide 17 aircraft was able to travel far faster than normal mechas. In the blink of an eye, the coastline was already within sight. Shishi was obviously far from an experienced pilot, but he could control the plane to make some simple changes in direction. After rising into the air, they headed straight toward the sea, and what they had to do now was to find that island. But where exactly was it? Shishi cast his eyes into the distance. At such high altitudes, an island that was 30 kilometers away should be visible to them. However, his expression quickly stiffened as he discovered that there were indeed islands in the distant ocean. However, there was a stretch of many islands rather than just one. At a rough glance, it appeared that there were at least 100 to 200 islands spread over a vast area of the ocean up ahead. What do we do? Shishi asked. Yi Xinglan had obviously also already taken in the situation, and she rolled her eyes as she replied, "How would I know? I'm not the captain. We can't communicate with captain for now, so let's just fly over there first. If worst comes to worst, we'll just have to search for the island after making a landing." Shishi grumbled. "The academy is being way too harsh. They only gave us 15 days, yet not only is the coastline completely sealed off, even the map they gave us is fake. There's clearly more than one island here. Hold on, give me the map for a second," Xu Shaoan suddenly requested. The map was being held by Yi Xinglan as she was responsible for giving directions, and she gave the map to Xu Shaoan as requested. Xu Shaoan said, "No matter how heartless the academy is, the island on the map they gave us has to at least be of the same shape as the island we're looking for. Xinglan, search through the islands and see if you can find any of a similar shape to the one on the map. If you find any islands like that, we'll fly toward that direction." Yi Xinglan's eyes lit up, and she snapped her fingers as she exclaimed, "You're a genius, Shaoan. Fly that way." Yi Xinglan pointed toward a cluster of islands, and purple light flashed through her eyes as she searched for islands of a similar shape to the one on the map. At this moment, Tang Wulin's eyes were tightly shut as powerful air currents buffeted his entire body. Thankfully, his blue-silver emperor vines were holding him in place, and he also had an immensely powerful body. Otherwise, he would have been unable to withstand this and fallen off long ago. From his position, he couldn't see anything that was happening down below, and he could only wait for Shishi to find their destination. Right at this moment, Tang Wulin suddenly heard a loud sound approaching, and he opened his eyes with difficulty, upon which he discovered 2 shadows flying past either side of their aircraft in a flash. The 2 shadows were also fighter aircrafts, except they were a lot faster than their aircraft. The 2 battle aircraft swerved around before arriving in front of them, then continued to fly on ahead while maintaining the same speed as their aircraft. Immediately thereafter, 4 more fighter aircrafts appeared on either side, as well as behind them, and all 6 of these aircrafts maintained the same speed as them. A voice sounded in Shishi's earpiece again. "You have been ordered to turn around immediately. Otherwise, you'll be struck down right away." Shishi scoffed in a disdainful manner. "Strike me down if you dare." He abruptly pushed the control shaft as he spoke, and the plane suddenly accelerated before swerving downward. Even Yi Xinglan was given a fright by his bold maneuver, let alone the aircraft pilots from the North Sea Legion. The 6 fighter aircrafts hurriedly changed directions to try and surround them again. It was undoubtedly the case that Shishi had the element of surprise in his favor, but his skills were far inferior compared to these trained pilots. At the control tower, Shen Yue arrived as quickly as she could, and the major that had detained Tang Wulin and the others was standing right beside her. However, the expression on his face made her feel rather uneasy. "What's the situation like?" Shen Yue asked. "They're very aggressive and refuse to turn around. We've surrounded them to force them to slow down, but they're plunging their aircraft almost straight down to try and escape our aircrafts. What they're doing is very dangerous even for a seasoned pilot, and they could crash and die at any moment," Colonel Lu Ming replied in a grim voice. Shen Yue's brows furrowed tightly as she asked, "How long until the first mecha squad arrives on the scene?" Lu Ming replied, "They're only around a minute away." Shen Yue heaved a faint sigh of relief upon hearing this. "After the mecha squad gets to them, capture them in the air right away, then bring them back here. Make sure not to kill or harm them during the process. Understood?" Fighter aircrafts possessed great offensive power, but were not suited to capturing targets in midair. This was why a mecha squad had to be deployed to assist them. On the Skyglide 17 aircraft, those bastards. They're using the strong air currents from their propellers to disrupt us. I can't get around them. What do we do? Shishi was feeling extremely frustrated. They were already very close to the islands down below, but the 6 fighter aircrafts had completely outmaneuvered him and were constantly disrupting his efforts to fly toward the islands, forcing him to deviate from his intended route. If it weren't for the borderline suicidal maneuvers that Shishi had used to throw them off, it was quite likely that they would have been forced back to the North Sea Legion base already. However, this was only to be expected. After all, Shishi was a complete novice pilot, and he couldn't just crash the aircraft directly into the other aircraft. 2 of the aircrafts had flown to a higher altitude before going completely vertical, using the powerful air currents blasting out of their propellers to force their aircraft downward. The other aircrafts also employed the same method, except they were doing it from the side, thereby forcing their aircraft to swerve away from the islands down below. It was undoubtedly the case that these 6 fighter aircrafts were all being flown by exceptional pilots, and it was far too simple for them to throw Shishi off his game. "Ask the captain what we should do. Ask if we should abandon the aircraft," Yi Xinglan said to Xu Shaoan after a brief hesitation. Xu Shaoan hurriedly made a few simple hand signals to Tang Wulin through the transparent aircraft canopy. Tang Wulin had naturally also seen the disruptive methods being employed by the aircrafts around them, and a cold light flashed through his eyes as he waved his hand toward Xu Shaoan before pointing at himself. Right at this moment, Shishi suddenly yelled, "There are mechas approaching." 6 mechas whistled through the air beneath them, and they were just as fast as the fighter aircrafts. All of them were painted completely black, and they quickly appeared beneath their aircraft. Right at this moment, discharge openings extended from the undersides of the 6 aircrafts, immediately following which a series of massive nets shot forth from within those openings, instantly encompassing the Skyglide 17 aircraft. The nets had been blasted with clinical precision, avoiding their turbojet propeller, and as soon as the nets captured their aircraft, they immediately stretched taut. The propulsion force generated by 6 aircrafts was far more powerful than the force that could be generated by one, and their aircraft was literally being dragged back toward the Legion base. They'd been captured in midair. Tang Wulian and the others had never even heard of such feats being accomplished, yet they were witnessing such a spectacle firsthand. Right at this moment, Tang Wulian, who had been lying flat on the aircraft this entire time, suddenly sat bolt upright. Immediately thereafter, a gargantuan creature suddenly appeared before him. At this moment, the 6 aircrafts that were responsible for the midair detainment, the 6 black mechas that were responsible for protecting the 6 aircrafts, and the control tower were all appraising the situation that was unfolding with rapt focus. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.